The first sound is the long scrape of a spear butt against dry earth. The Aegeans of Thebes hears it somewhere along the line, a small sound beneath the bronze breathing of 300 men who have never known defeat. Beside him stand the warriors of the sacred band, pairs of men bound by training, oath, pride, and love, each man close enough to know the breath of the one beside him. Across the field, Macedonian sarissas lower like a moving forest of iron. Behind those spears stand King Philip II of Macedon and his 18-year-old son Alexander, watching the old Greek world prepare to die. The Aegeans does not know that later generations will call this the Battle of Chaeronea. He only knows that the ground is shaking, the Macedonians are coming, and the freedom Thebes once won with blood now depends on a line that cannot bend. What does a warrior do when the world he was trained to master has changed faster than his courage can adapt? That is the modern bridge into Chaeronea, because every age produces people who are excellent at rules that stop mattering. A worker masters an industry just before technology replaces it. A soldier trains for one war and is sent into another. A city builds its identity on old victories, then meets an enemy who has studied those victories and designed a future around defeating them. Chaeronea is the story of that moment. It is the day Greek freedom did not simply lose a battle, it discovered that its old way of fighting power was no longer enough. Chapter 1. The Men Who Had Never Broken. Before Chaeronea can hurt, we have to understand what stood on the Theban right wing. The sacred band of Thebes was not ordinary infantry. It was an elite corps of 300 chosen warriors, remembered by Plutarch as 150 pairs of lovers and beloveds, men whose courage was supposed to be strengthened by the shame of failing in front of the person who knew them most deeply. They had helped make Thebes the terror of Greece. At Leuctra in 371 BCE, Thebes shattered Spartan dominance and proved that the most feared army in Greece could bleed like any other. For decades, the sacred band carried the memory of that revolution. They were the men who had seen Sparta fall. They were the men other Greeks whispered about before battle. They were the weapon Thebes trusted when the line had to hold. The sacred band had prestige, discipline, and a reputation for invincibility, until the day they faced Philip's Macedonian army at Chaeronea. That is the peak before the fall. The higher the memory, the harder the ground feels when it gives way. But Thebes was no longer the city of Epaminondas at his height, and Athens was no longer the empire of the 5th century. The Greek world had exhausted itself through wars, alliances, betrayals, rebuildings, and rivalries that left the old city-states proud but fractured. Freedom still mattered to them, but freedom had become something each city defined for itself, often against its neighbor. Philip understood that weakness. He did not come south as a barbarian outsider swinging blindly at Greek civilization. He came as a patient king who had learned Greek politics, survived captivity in Thebes as a young man, rebuilt Macedon, and turned a once vulnerable kingdom into the most dangerous military power in the Aegean world. He knew the Greek city-states were brave. He also knew they were divided, and division is a door power always looks for. Chapter 2. The King Who Rebuilt War. Philip II was not supposed to be the man who mastered Greece. When he took power in Macedon, his kingdom was threatened by enemies, instability, and the contempt of Greeks who saw Macedonians as rough northern outsiders. Philip rebuilt everything. He reorganized the army around the sarissa, a long pike that gave the Macedonian phalanx a reach no traditional hoplite line could ignore. He combined infantry, cavalry, skirmishers, engineers, diplomacy, bribery, marriages, and timing into a system that made war feel less like a duel and more like a machine. A Greek hoplite fought inside the pressure of the shield wall, close enough to see the eyes of the man he killed. A Macedonian phalangite fought inside a deeper formation, projecting a hedge of spear points forward before the enemy could touch him. The difference was not only equipment, it was a different imagination of battle. Philip's army did not need to win by courage alone, because it could win by coordination. His cavalry could strike where the line opened. His phalanx could pin. His officers could maneuver. His diplomacy could isolate enemies before his army arrived. What happens when an old military culture built on citizen courage meets a professional system built to exploit every gap? That question would be answered at Chaeronea. Athens saw the danger earlier than some. Demosthenes thundered against Philip, warning that Macedonian power would not stop at the northern frontier if the Greeks waited too long. Thebes also understood the threat, though Theban and Athenian cooperation required swallowing years of rivalry. The alliance that formed against Philip was brave, but it was late. Athens brought citizen soldiers and public fury. Thebes brought the sacred band and the memory of Leuctra. Other allies added their contingents. Together they made a Greek army strong enough to matter, but perhaps not unified enough to master the enemy now coming toward them. Chapter 3. The field where the old world stood. Chaeronea lay in Boeotia, near roads and hills that mattered because armies do not fight in empty space. The Greek allies took position to block Philip's advance, with Athenians on one wing and Thebans on the other. The sacred band stood among the Thebans, close to the place where the hardest blow would eventually fall. Philip commanded the Macedonian right, facing the Athenians. Alexander, still only 18, stood on the Macedonian left with experienced officers near him, facing the Theban side of the line. That image alone carries the future inside it. On one side, the old Greek city-states stood with their citizen traditions, rival pride, and famous dead behind them. On the other, Philip and Alexander stood with the army that would soon carry Macedonian power across Asia. The battle was not simply Greece against Macedon. It was the past meeting the future before either side fully understood the cost. The numbers were large enough to shake the plain. Roughly 30,000 Macedonian infantry with cavalry support against a Greek force of comparable scale. But numbers alone do not explain why battles turn. Discipline turns them. Terrain turns them. Timing turns them. A gap in one wing can become a kingdom. A false retreat can become a trap. A young prince's charge can become the beginning of an empire. Ancient accounts differ in details, but the broad shape is clear. Philip used discipline and maneuver to draw the Athenians out of position, while Alexander and the Macedonian left struck the Theban side with devastating force. The Athenians fought with courage, but courage can become dangerous when it follows what looks like opportunity too far. If Philip's withdrawal on the right was deliberate, it was a masterclass in making the enemy mistake movement for weakness. The Athenian line stretched. The order loosened. The old citizen army stepped into the space Philip wanted it to occupy. And while one wing was being drawn out, the Theban side faced the pressure of Macedonian assault. Chapter 4. The Prince and the Sacred Band. Alexander was not yet Alexander the Great. He was a prince under his father's eye, young enough to be underestimated and ambitious enough to make underestimation dangerous. At Chaeronea, he faced the Thebans and the Sacred Band, the most emotionally charged target on the field. For a young commander, breaking them would not be only a tactical success, it would be an announcement. The Macedonian phalanx advanced with sarissas lowered, rows of spear points reaching far ahead of the men who carried them. To stand before that formation was to face distance turned into a weapon. A hoplite wanted to close. The sarissa made closing deadly. A hoplite wanted to push shield against shield. The sarissa struck before the shield could do its work. This is where the visual language of the battle matters. Bronze shields pressed against a wall of long pikes, Theban spears trying to find flesh behind layers of iron points, men shouting through dust while the line compresses. The Sacred Band did not run. Their story would not matter if they had. They held where they stood, fighting inside a world that was changing around them. What does loyalty mean when the formation is breaking and the person you love is still beside you? For the men of the sacred band, courage was not abstract. It had a face. It had a hand gripping a shield next to yours. It had a body falling where you could not pretend not to see it. The Macedonians pressed harder. Alexander's attack, whether led by cavalry, infantry, or combined force as ancient and modern interpretations debate, became the spear point of a new age. The Theban line strained. The sacred band held. Then holding became dying. Chapter 5. Greece breaks here. The climax at Chaeronea is not the moment a banner falls. It is the moment the sacred band is surrounded and still refuses to dissolve. Short sentences belong here. The pikes close. The dust thickens. A shield drops. A man calls a name. No one answers. Diogenes stays with his men. The Macedonians keep pressing. The line becomes a knot. The knot becomes a grave. The sacred band, once thought unbeaten, dies where it stands. Plutarch says Philip later came upon the place where the 300 lay together, understood who they were, and wept. His reported words cut through the triumph. Perish any man who suspects that these men either did or suffered anything base. That quote matters because even the conqueror recognized that defeat had not made them small. The Athenians were routed. The Thebans were broken. The field belonged to Macedon. Greek freedom did not vanish in a single minute, but something decisive had happened. The city-states could still speak, vote, argue, remember, and resent. But after Chaeronea, they no longer controlled the direction of Greek history. Philip did. And after Philip, Alexander would. Chapter 6. The Lion and the Silence. After the battle, Philip treated Athens with surprising moderation but dealt harshly with Thebes because diplomacy after victory was another form of war. He did not need to destroy every city. He needed them arranged beneath Macedonian leadership. The League of Corinth would follow, presenting Greek unity under Philip's command and preparing the war against Persia that he would not live to lead. In political language, this was settlement. In emotional language, it was the end of the old independence. The Greek cities had spent generations defending freedom from Persia and from one another, only to find themselves unified by the king they had failed to stop. This is the modern bridge returning. Sometimes the world does not end because people lack courage. Sometimes it ends because courage is trained for yesterday's danger. The sacred band had courage. Athens had courage. Thebes had memory, pride, and men willing to die. Philip had a system. That is why Chaeronea hurts. It is not a story of cowards losing to brave men. It is a story of brave men meeting a military and political future they could not defeat in time. Near the battlefield, the Lion of Chaeronea would later mark the Theban dead, and modern excavations found a mass grave beneath it with the remains of men laid in ordered rows. The stone lion does not roar. It watches. That silence is the right ending. History records Philip's victory, Alexander's rise, and Macedon's domination of Greece. But beneath the lion are men who were not trying to become symbols. They were trying to hold the line. Diogenes disappears into that line with them. We do not hear his final words. We do not know whose hand he reached for when the Macedonian pikes closed. We only know that the men who had never broken were found together. The battle ended Greek freedom because the old city-state world could no longer protect itself from the new machinery of power. But the human story is smaller and sharper. It is the story of men who stood in the path of the future, knowing only that the person beside them must not be left alone. And perhaps that is why Chaeronea still matters. Because every age eventually asks the same question. When the world you were built for begins to disappear, do you run from the future or do you hold the line long enough to be remembered?